And we thank you for that. We thank you. We thank you for Joel coming. In Yeshua's holy name, we pray. Amen. Okay, Joel, if you would like to come over, you get to sit in the hot seat. I'm going to get up and let you sit here behind the computer. You don't have to do a thing. All you do is just do your thing.
Okay.
And so people who have not checked in yet, I'm going to introduce Joel Hunter, and he will take it from here. And then when he's done speaking, he'll turn it back over to me. So we're very grateful that you're coming. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Keep bumping stuff. Well, so I guess the obvious. My name is Joel Hunter, and I'm a missionary associate with the Assemblies of God World Missions. Type in my password for my notes, but so I'm Assemblies of God, or I'm a missionary associate with Assemblies of God World Missions, and I am going to be working with a church in Tokyo called Yokota International Christian Assembly. And I am going to be the small groups ministries and counseling ministries pastor at Yokota ICA. It's actually right near Yokota Air Force Base, which is about, my understanding is about 5 or 6 minutes away from Yokota Air Force Base there in Tokyo. And so last week, I posted my first itineration video trying to get the word out about raising my support, and my mom shared it, and people saw it, and so I got invited here. been scrambling to and praying, asking God about what to share tonight, and so something I've really been focusing on lately as I've just been talking to people is, and I felt like it would be important to share it, is my mission. Um, is going to be to provide practical training and support and resources to pastoral counselors, small group leaders, with the goal of developing emotionally and spiritually healthy disciples. Um, the vision is for people to experience the healing, restoration, and comfort that comes from an active relationship with God by becoming spiritually and emotionally healthy disciples of Jesus. Um, about 12 years ago, I had the privilege of being a missionary intern in Tokyo when I was finishing my bachelor's degree as a missions major at Central Bible College. And as I've been thinking about that time and preparing to go back, I keep thinking about this one woman that I met with several times. Her name was Yuka, and I was initially set up to visit with her and just help her out with her English and be a language partner. But the person that had connected me to her just said, there's some things going on in her life, and this might be a really great opportunity to minister as well. And so as I started talking with her and getting to know her, I learned that she was just in a really rough marriage. Her and her husband had a son together, but he was openly seeing other women, was not trying to hide it, and she was really wrestling with what to do. And in Japanese culture, and she had some different options, and none of them were good. If she were to divorce her husband, there's just a huge stigma around the idea of divorce. So much so that at one point, she and I had, as we were just kind of talking about it, I was asking her questions because I just didn't know what it would be like for someone to get divorced in Japanese culture. And um, I've had her as well as a few other friends explain to me that it's kind of like a used car. Nobody wants a used car in Japan. I mean, it's so like getting divorced and then getting remarried is really difficult in Japan. It's unique. The attitudes on divorce there's still a significant stigma in regard to it. Being a single parent in Japan is a really difficult thing um, because it's outside of the typical cultural norm. And in fact, I was looking at some statistics on marriage this week in Japan, and young people, fewer and fewer, are actually getting married. They just have these relationships, um, but they never culminate in marriage, or it just takes a really long time. They just don't see the point in it because if we're going to get, if things are going to be bad anyways, let's just not go through the formality. So um, that story of Yucca got me thinking about a passage that some of my friends went through earlier this year. We decided, me and a couple of guys I get together with once a week, we started working through different books of the Bible. And we started with James this year, and it took us about 5 months to get through the book of James. We had some I would say, very lively conversations about it. And so I wanted to share from James, but I'm also going to go back into the Old Testament because I feel like, when we find God saying something, he doesn't just say it in one place. He says it throughout Scripture. And so the passage I'm going to read really quickly is out of the English Standard Version, and it is James 1, 2 through 18, and it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For the person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say that he is tempted. I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So tonight I really just have one point, and that is that as a believer, as a Christ follower, God never wastes pain. Pain is never something that's wasted. Um, as a minister, at the core of who I am, I really feel called to help people experience healing and restoration, comfort, and an active relationship with God. I'm an elementary school counselor. I'm in the mental health profession. Healing, especially emotionally and spiritually, is just, again, it's a part of my DNA. Um, but as I've talked to different people about this topic over the last few years, I've really felt like people overlook how valuable painful experiences can be. Um, it's not fun, and in fact, I think we try to avoid pain. That's why we go in and see physical therapists. I've got a friend who's a physical therapist, and he will tell you that if you come and see him, he's going to make you hurt. But on the other side of that pain is healing. On the other side of that pain is, restoration of movement, and all of a sudden you can do things that you couldn't do a few weeks earlier, but you've got to go through the pain to get to that point. And so pain can be a wonderful tool. Um, One of my favorite books, I've read it, I think, 3 or 4 times in the last 18 months, is called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzero. And he's got a quote in there that has always stood out to me. It says, "When we do not process before God the very feelings that make us human, such as fear or sadness or anger, we leak. Our churches are filled with leaking Christians who have not treated their emotions as a discipleship issue. Grieving is not possible without paying attention to our anger and sadness. Most people who fill churches are nice and respectable. Few explode in anger, at least not in public. The majority, like me," this is Peter quote saying that, says, "stuff these difficult feelings, trusting that God will honor our noble efforts. The result is that we leak through in soft ways, such as passive aggressive behavior, not showing up late, sarcastic remarks, a nasty tone of voice, and giving the silent treatment." I think when we forget, or when we close ourselves off to the idea that God never wastes pain, we overlook the idea that sometimes trials are a vote of confidence. And when I think about this passage of James, I almost automatically go back to Job. I feel like Job is a classic case study in God not wasting pain. Um, and I was reviewing Job last night, and just going over his story, and you think someone who, he had everything, according to the book of Job, was one of the most wealthy men in the world, right? But also one of the most godly as well. And Satan goes to him and basically says, if you took everything away from him, he would curse you. And Satan had to get permission from God to do all of these terrible things to Job, to get permission to take away his family, his wealth, inflict him with sickness. And what I like most about Job is you see what I would call an emotionally healthy response to it. He doesn't ignore his grief. He doesn't pretend like it's not there. In fact, he invites his friends to share in his pain and suffering, and they cause more pain and suffering in the process, and they blame him for everything that's happened, even though on the outside as spectators we're looking at this, and clearly we know he's not at fault, and even God he hasn't done anything to deserve this, and yet his friends are trying to tell him, well, you must have done something. And at one point I think his wife is even just like, just curse God and get it over with. And at one point in the book of Job, he says, I've treasured his commands. um, but it doesn't stop him from saying, God, I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why I'm going through this. And it doesn't stop him from being honest with not just his friends about what he's experiencing, but more importantly with God about what he's going through. And what sticks out to me is that, um, God responds and essentially just says, you don't know any, like, who are you to tell me to question me about this, right? Like, essentially just says, I'm God and you're not. And until you are in a place where you can counsel me, just remember who you're talking to. And when he gets done, and this goes on, God responds in like 3 chapters. And he gets done, and Job is just like, he takes a step back, and I actually, I put it in my notes. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And, you know, again, I feel like this is a great case study in God not wasting pain, because it wasn't that God couldn't take the complaints that Job had. It wasn't that God wasn't big enough. But he had to remind him about who he was and his place in the world. Job needed to be humbled. If he had one fault, maybe it was that he needed to be humbled, right?
Right.
And so then God does that, and his response is, "You're right, dirt." And then God's immediate response is, "Okay, I'm going to take care of your friends, and I'm going to bless you." And by the end of the book, I mean, it's not just that God restored to him everything that he lost, but he had more than he had before, and all because God allowed him to be tested. His pain, his trials were a vote of confidence, not a punishment. And I think, again, so many times we go through things and we do feel like God's punishing us, and for some reason we've got this idea that God's got his thumb on us, right? And instead of looking for whatever it is that God maybe wants to teach us or is attempting to bring out of us, um, we just take it as punishment. We kind of go hide in the corner and wait for it to get over. um, and so I wrote my notes here that when we look back at Job, we see that just like it says in verse 4, Job's faith was made perfect. So we're going back to James chapter 1, verse 4. On the other side of this, Job has a better, deeper relationship with God. He has more faith in God than he had before. He's got a better testimony than he had before, because he's endured trial and he's endured hardship. He lost his family. His wife abandoned him. He's at one point scraping his sores with broken pottery. Verse 5, it says, sometimes when I had my notes, sometimes when we seek wisdom, that doesn't mean that the trial goes away, but rather that God gives us what we need to walk through the trial.
Yep.
And I heard a message, one of my friends had posted it in a Facebook group on Habakkuk. And in the Habakkuk, you've got this prophet who is really kind of frustrated with Israel for all he recognizes all the sin that's going on in the country, right? And then God tells him, okay, I'm going to have the Chaldeans punished. I'm going to use them. He's like, but they're more evil than us, And but by the end of it, he's worked through that whole process. He's just been honest with God about how he feels. Worked through that whole process with God, and by the end of it, there's a verse that um, well, I wish I could remember the exact quote, but it says that you'll make my feet like the deer. And in this message, they were talking about how sometimes God doesn't remove the obstacles. What he does is he gives us the tools to go through them or to go over them.
Yep.
And they were talking in this particular message about like the animal that was mentioned, how it's kind of got like this webbed foot. What? Yeah, yeah. I was like, but it, like this webbed foot, and it was when I heard that message, I think it wasn't long after I went to Glacier National Park this summer, and I did quite a bit of hiking, and in the process was able to get pretty close to some mountain goats, and I got to watch those suckers climb, and they do climb up sheer rock faces, and I mean it is a thing to watch, and to think that sometimes God gives us that ability to just, again, not remove the obstacle from us, but just give us the ability to go through it or to go over it or to endure it, right? Sometimes that's God's grace is just giving us the strength to stand, right? Um, so wisdom through the trials. One thing that my friends and I, when we were talking, and I want to make sure and give them credit because we joked around about like who would be the first one to use these notes in a message. But we did talk about how, when you get to verses 9 and 10, it talks about the rich and the poor. Trials are the great equalizer, right? We're all created equal. God created us all equal, right? We're all equal in the sight of God. But trials prove that. There is nobody that's exempt from a trial or challenges in life. I mean, rich and poor, they have different trials, but they still have trials. And I think sometimes it's easy again to look at somebody who, maybe they've got it all together financially, but we don't know what it is that they are wrestling with um, in their personal or their private life that we're just unaware of. And then the other thing that is my friends, their name's Matt and Jordan, that we talked about. Um, and I really appreciate this idea. Sometimes we confuse the idea of um, a temptation and a trial. They're really not the same thing. Temptation is something that comes from inside of us, right? I think it says in verse. Yeah, verse 13 it says, "Let no one say he is when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God, for God can't tempt anyone with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires." Those things come from within us. I mean, it's just a product of the fall. Um, and sometimes we can get confused about that. Trials will always be something external. Again, there's things that God allows us to experience. But even with temptation, God still gives us the strength to overcome those things. God's grace is still present in those moments, and um, and I mean, it's just I love the Book of James. It's probably one of my favorite books in the Bible, and it's just so encouraging. Um, but it also does bring up a point that joy is a choice. It talks about rejoice when we go through trials of many kinds, right? It's a choice. I tell my students often that they can choose how they feel. They get to choose what there's a lot that's outside of their control as a kid, but they can absolutely control what they think. They can absolutely control what they say, and they have complete control over how they feel, even if they don't always realize it. And joy is a choice. We can. I mean, I was thinking about the story of Paul and Silas in prison, and they're sitting there in chains, and they start singing hymns, right? They start singing worship music, and they're just worshiping God and enjoying themselves. And all of a sudden, there's an earthquake, and they're free. They didn't leave, but they're free. And that ends up being a testimony. That worship was a choice that they made. They didn't. I can't imagine being. I've never been arrested or been imprisoned. I can't imagine it being a good experience or one in which I might want to sing, hymns. But again, it was a choice that they made. Um, and so, God never wastes pain. Like I love Job, and bringing this, circling back around to missions and missions in Japan. Japan is less than 1% Christian. That means and I said this in my introduction video, for every 1,000 people, less than 10 know Jesus. And that would be a generous estimate. Um, it is over 99% non-Christian, and they come from a Buddhist worldview, and it is one of the most challenging mission fields in the world, and it is one of a handful of countries that has never experienced a move of the Holy Spirit or revival of any kind. And missionaries have been going there for decades. The Assemblies of God has had missionaries there almost since its inception, um, and so it's just one of the most challenging fields to minister in. And for me particularly, with my um, calling, especially in my training in mental health, I was doing some research, and I was looking up some of their attitudes there are such serious stigmas about mental health issues in Japan. So much so that when someone goes into counseling, until they have what some of the research I read, so that until they have consistent contact with people with mental health issues, the counselors have stigmas about people with mental health problems. And so there's just this immense opportunity for ministry. There is an entire people group who are dying without hope. They go through divorce, they lose family members, they have accidents. When I was in Japan, there was a guy who got really upset one day. He lost his job, his girlfriend left him, and so his response to that was to go to a train station in Akihabara and start stabbing people. And I mean, but he just didn't know what to do. And they are a people group that when they experience pain, it doesn't have a purpose. And there's no one around them to let them know that their pain can have a purpose, that their pain doesn't have to be wasted, that they can have a relationship with God, and that he can heal them emotionally. He can help them with their relationships, restore hope. I mean, it's a people group that is absolutely devoid of hope. And so, yeah, that's kind of my message. Like I said, I had one point, and it was that God doesn't waste pain, and that, again, the Japanese people, less than 1%, consider themselves to be Christian. And honestly, of that less than 1%, that is divided up between evangelical Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. I mean, groups that stateside we wouldn't even consider to be Christian groups. And so it's just an enormous mission field. And the team that I'm going to be a part of, we really do believe that God is bringing revival to Japan. There have been some different, I would say, signs of hope. There have been some different things where different groups of Christians are starting to get together and coordinate ministry efforts and things like that. And so we really do feel like God is moving and getting ready to do something big. And so we're looking forward to getting ready to get over there. Dan and Paul Lumadou are the missionaries I'm going to be working with. They're going to be pastoring Yokota International Christian Assembly. And then a guy named Dakota, he is going to be our young adults and youth pastor. And like I said, I'll be working with counseling ministry and small group ministries there. And all four of us are raising our budgets right now to be able to go over to Japan. So.
Are you ready to take questions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best to answer.
What is the name of the group that you're going to be working with over there?
I am going to go with Assemblies of God World Missions. I actually just got ordained with the Assemblies of God this year. So
is it going to be a big deal going over there during the Olympics?
I don't know, and I don't know, especially with some of the restrictions. But since I won't be going over there as a tourist, like I'll be going over there, beginning of some sort of resident visa. Some of the missionaries actually, Justin Canavan and another couple that are missionaries to Japan, they have actually just been able to get their visas through with no issues. So.
Can you kind of explain how you plan on going about reaching people?
Yes. Yeah, so Yokota International Christian Assembly, because it's right near the Air Force Base, we're actually going to be ministering to military families. There's a lot of internationals in that area because of the Air Force Base, and Tokyo is just, I mean, it's an international destination. And then the actual Japanese there. So Yokota has been there for quite a while. It's an established church. And so my particular role, my long-term vision is to help churches develop pastoral counseling ministries and use that as a method of reaching people for Jesus. There's a lot of stigma. So going
you're
back,
starting with the churches
Yeah.
first and going on
Well,
from there.
well, I mean, the churches, will be the launching points. I mean, it really is one of those things. You're building relationships in Japan, and we'll start with the churches and work our way from there. Is that?
Yeah.
helpful? Yeah.
So are you going to be moving back and forth between the different established churches there?
No, I'll actually be at Yokota. I mean, I'll serve wherever they ask me to, but I'll be based at Yokota.
Where will
International
you
Airport.
live?
Hopefully close to the church in the Tokyo area.
Yeah, well, I mean, is the plan to share an apartment with somebody
Well,
over there, or
Yeah, I mean, some of
what
those.
are you thinking?
Well, some of those details I get those figured out closer to when I get my budget raised. There, at some point I will have an apartment in the Tokyo area. When I went there before, when I went there and did my internship, I lived by myself in Inage in Chiba Prefecture. So I'm used to riding the trains around Tokyo and the subways and stuff like that. So.
I just didn't know if there was somebody over there that you would just be moving in and sharing expenses with, or are you going to
Well,
be going in and
my budget is designed for me to live by myself. At some point, when I first get there, I may initially live with somebody until I can get my own place, whether it's the Lamadoos or like Dakota or something like that. But yeah, my budget is designed for me to be able to live on my own.
And what are some of the things that they plan to outreach from the church?
Well, I haven't talked to Dan about that specifically. I know that, especially in Asian countries, there's a lot of relational evangelism, getting to know people and building friendships and things like that. Like I said, Yokota is right next to that Air Force base, and so there's a nice chunk of military families that come and are part of that. So I do know from conversations with Dan that he and Paula and I have similar ideas about having people into our home and just like actually the three of us. Yeah, well, I mean the three of us really love to cook, and so just building relationships that way, having people over for food and just getting to know them and being open to share and what we do and how God is working in our lives.
When you were over there before, you taught people English. Was that an inroad for relationship building?
It can be, and there are some ministries that use that as an opportunity to minister to people. In fact, there are some churches who will do English English schools after they go to their public school, and so they'll go to the church and learn English and usually do some kind of Bible lesson in English and things like that. So there are definitely churches that use that as a ministry tool.
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that. I was like,
Yeah.
it would be so sneaky, because God's word doesn't return void, and use that,
Well, my hope, honestly, really is to help develop a team of volunteer pastoral counselors, because there is such a stigma when it comes to mental health in Japan. Going to a counselor is really difficult. It's not difficult in terms of finding somebody, but it just, like I said, there's a stigma attached to it. But you can go talk to a pastor or a priest about what's going on, and there's absolutely no stigma with that. And so my hope again is developing or opening the door for a way to reach out to people and minister to their very real needs, but that it also is culturally appropriate, and doesn't create problems And so I think, again, creating a volunteer pastoral counseling team. And it's not that I'm going to go over and train mental health professionals. But in pastoral counseling, really the goal is to address their spiritual need. But in doing that, you can address some very basic things that people go through without the need for mental health training, because there are some just very simple things. There are things that people go through in life, like sometimes they have marital issues. You don't have to go to a professional counselor to get marriage counseling. You can get some really great counseling from pastors and things like that. Sometimes it's parenting. What do I do with my kid? Or I don't understand what's going on. There's some really great, like I said, opportunities for pastoral counseling to minister to, like I said, felt needs, but then again say, this is part of the hope we have, and minister to the very real spiritual need.
I don't think that you can divide one from the other.
No, I agree.
Because the answer is always going to go back to the spiritual condition. So I could see how that would be very effective, and really fill a need. Do you think that the stigma that is attached to what you were discussing, do you think that is a prideful, like it's shameful, and that it shows weakness?
Well, I mean that might be some of it. Again, I was actually reading a paper that came up in like a scholarly search I did, and one of the things that they mentioned in terms of the stigmas revolving around mental health really seemed to be a lack of accurate information when it comes to mental health issues. Actually, I've got, let's see. Actually, put down a few quotes here. Here's the one. It was my first one. Regarding knowledge about mental illness, reviewed studies showed that in the Japanese general population, few people think that people can recover from mental disorders. That's the first. It's almost like that myth or fact type of thing. First myth: few people can recover from mental disorders. Psychological factors, including weakness of personality, are often considered the cause of mental illness. So another myth would be that someone is suffering from mental illness because they have a weak personality, not realizing that they're, depending on the type of mental health issue, could be some very real biological factors going on.
Can you imagine all the people walking around with bipolar and ADHD?
Yeah. And then
personalities.
Oh yeah, and then it said, in addition, the majority of the general Japanese public in Japan keep a greater social distance from individuals with mental illness, especially in close personal relationships. So it's not just that there's bad information. It's then that, okay, if somebody reveals that they are struggling with some kind of a mental health disorder, they get distance, which again, in a group culture, I mean, when you're in a culture that is so, I would say, family oriented. I mean, Japanese culture is an amazing culture, very close. I mean, being a part of a group is huge. Well, if you've got a mental health issue and you start to reveal it to someone, you open yourself up to the possibility of rejection and being ostracized or removed from the group, which, like my mom said, could make it worse depending on what it is. Interestingly enough, there's less of a stigma when it comes to depression, which I think is fantastic. So,
Anybody else?
There's there's quite a big percentage of people in Japan that commit suicide, isn't there?
oh yeah, it's got one of the highest suicide rates in the world. And in fact, when I was there, it would have been 12 years ago, I was in a subway station, and it was all kind of encapsulated, and it was one of the newer subway stations, and it has why is this all so enclosed? Because then the subway train would come, and the doors would open on the subway car, and then the doors in the station would open, and I was told that it was to prevent people from jumping in front of the train. And I mean, they, the older ones, some of them have barriers, the JR line, they just didn't have any sort of barrier at all. And it wasn't uncommon. If a train is late in Japan, not always, so it might be an earthquake or somebody jumped in front of it. Usually it's one of those two things. Not always, but I mean, and I was there long enough to start being able to read the kanji to find out why.
Don't they have a lot of problems with people jumping out of windows of tall buildings when they're working too?
I mean, I don't know about that. I know, like I said, when I was there, it was pretty common for people to jump in front of trains and things like that. So
I'm going to go ahead. We can ask Joel more questions
Yeah,
after we
absolutely.
sign off.
Okay.
No, don't go away yet.
Oh.
You have to tell them how to contact
Okay.
you.
yeah, so I have a website. You can go to joelinjapan.com or
Spell it for me.
I'm sorry, www.joelinjapan.com. And then I've got a Facebook page. You can either look up Joel in Japan or Rev Joel in Japan, REV Joel in Japan. So, and then those should connect you to. I've got the Assemblies of God has a secure giving website where people can go up and sign up for one-time or recurring monthly giving, and then if you just like I've actually got some things on my website that if you want to be a part of my newsletter or my prayer team, you can fill out a form on the website and let me know. But I'm trying to raise $4,800 in monthly support, and then I do have a cash budget that will help me cover like one-time expenses like plane tickets and things like that, moving stuff like that I've got to raise. So
But
it's
weren't you saying you wanted to find people to partner with you to kind of help spread the news?
yeah, and even that is huge. If you reach out to me and you're interested in just helping me raise my support or put me in contact with people, yeah, that's a huge part of it. As a missionary associate with the Assemblies of God, I'm not allowed to cold call churches. I can only itinerate through my social connections. And so if I know somebody who knows somebody and they can make introductions for me, then I can reach out to people. But I can't. Fully appointed or career missionaries can call churches in our district and get permission to call churches in other districts, but I'm not allowed to do that unless I've got a personal connection with them. So
Very good. Okay, Ruth, would you on my Facebook page type down his contact information for people to be able to find that in case they didn't write it down? And so, sir, thank you.
yeah, thank you so
Thank you so much. And you can have a seat and I'll get signed off here and then we can continue questions and answers for you.
Anointing to do as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight and listening to Joel Hunter and his mom, Ruth, is one of our members. And she just put his contact information in there for you to be able to go to his website. And with that being said, we will say Shabbat Shalom. And Rabbi, would you like to say the Aaronic blessing over?
Yes, because you've heard the message, and it's my responsibility to call upon God to bless you. The way I do it is open up the windows of heaven and say, Rekaka Yehovah, Vishmereka. Yer Yehovah Pernavaleka Bikuneka. Yasa Yehovah Pernavaleka Salam Leka. Shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and establish peace for you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Ken, Yehi Ratzon, let all that we put our hands to prosper. Let the beauty of Adonai Eloheinu be upon us. Prosper for us all the work that we do. Yes, prosper the work that we do. Remember to read your partial readings tomorrow. And if you have prayer requests, just contact me, private message me on Facebook, and we will lift you up before the Lord. Hope you have a blessed week. Check out Joel's website. And remember that we are now, we've got videos up on our YouTube site now, and I will be adding some more videos this week, including this one tonight. Shabbat Shalom. Good job, Joel.